They didn't need to say it out loud. It was in the way their eyes flicked over her thrifted coat, the way silence seemed to sharpen as she entered the room, not hostile, just dismissive. Ariana. Wells stepped through the heavy glass doors of room 214 at Kingsbridge Institute, and in that moment, the room told her exactly what it thought. You don't belong here. She'd heard that before, though, never in words. Words were too easy. It was the quiet pauses, the polite smiles stretched a beat too long, the way people subtly angled their bodies away from hers, in labs, libraries, and interviews. You learn to hear the silences when you've spent a lifetime listening to them. She crossed the room, slowly, her laptop bag swinging softly at her side. Rows of students had already filled the tiered seats most, in pressed blazers and sleek cardigans, their conversations laced with names like Stanford Phillips Exeter, IBM internships, and Dad's firm. She didn't recognize the language. She didn't need to. The message was clear. Ariana was 26. Older than most in this room. She didn't come here straight from high school with scholarship banners and AP medals. She came from the logistics floor of a freight warehouse, from the night shift at a gas station, where she studied MATLAB between transactions. She had pieced together brilliance the way some people piece together rent quietly, without margin for error. Now here she was, a first-year systems engineering graduate student at one of the most competitive programs in the country. The kind of place where being exceptional was assumed and being ordinary was disqualifying. She took a seat near the front where the scrutiny was sharpest. There was no place to hide. She flipped open her notebook with deliberate calm and let the room size her up. Behind her, the room buzzed with the low hum of pre-class ritual. Chairs creaked, laptops clicked open. Someone behind her whispered, "She's the one from community college, right?" Another voice chuckled, not cruelly, just confidently. "Let's see how long that lasts." Ariana didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She'd been in this scene before, not this room, not these faces, but the same script, a place where intelligence had a dress code, where being smart wasn't enough, unless it came wrapped in the right accent, the right last name, the right legacy. She breathed in slow and steady. This wasn't new. The front wall of room 214 loomed with whiteboard panels stretching from floor to ceiling. It reminded her of a performance stage, except here the applause was silence, and the spotlight came from a professor's narrowed eyes. A single equation on that board could turn a name into a legend or reduce a student to a cautionary tale. And today Ariana had a feeling that something would happen. Not because she wanted it, but because there's something in the air when pressure builds just right, the moment before a storm, the stillness before the lightning. She felt it settling over the room, and somewhere beneath the judgment, the doubt, and the designer jackets, she felt something else stirring in the silence. Anticipation. The door clicked shut behind him with surgical finality. Dr. Nathaniel Crane entered like a blade, sharp suit, sharp eyes, and sharper silence. The casual noise in the room evaporated the instant his heel touched the floor. He didn't speak right away. He never did. His presence alone did the speaking. Ariana didn't flinch. She had read about him long before arriving at Kingsbridge, a decorated expert in nonlinear systems, tenured for 35 years, and infamous for his teaching philosophy. Pressure reveals truth. His lectures were known for their brilliance, yes, but also their body count. Bright students proud, students hopeful, students all tested in front of others, made examples of. In real time, those who survived became stronger. Those who didn't switched departments. Dr. Crane walked to the center of the room, placed his tablet on the podium, and tapped it twice. The whiteboard behind him flickered to life with a cold blue glow. Then, without warning, his gaze swept the class and landed directly on Ariana. "Miss Wells," he said, stretching the name like he was unsure how it tasted. "You've joined us from Community College of Eastern Ohio. Yes?" A ripple of movement passed through the class. Some raised eyebrows, others tried to hide amused smirks. Ariana didn't blink. "Yes, sir." Crane nodded slowly. "Welcome to Kingsbridge." His tone was even, but beneath it, something else. A challenge. "Let's see what foundations you're working with." He turned to the board. With deliberate movements, he began writing an equation. Not one from the textbook, not even from the lecture notes. It sprawled across the board in segments, coupled differential systems, nonlinear feedback loops, time-dependent variables. A real monster, the kind professors save for doctoral defenses. Someone in the back let out a low whistle. Crane capped the marker. "Let's solve this together," he said. "Please show us how you'd begin." Ariana looked up, then stood. She knew what this was. Not a test. A performance, a public vetting. The room wasn't waiting for her to succeed. It was waiting for her to fail, politely, quietly, without blood, but with consequence. Her failure wouldn't make headlines. It would just confirm what most already suspected: she didn't belong here. She walked slowly to the front. Her boots made no sound on the polished tile. Dr. Crane handed her the marker, his fingers barely brushing hers. No smile, no encouragement. She turned toward the equation. It stared back at her like a gate no one expected her to open. The problem was brutal, not for its content but its implications. It wasn't just difficult. It was designed not to be solved, but to be survived. Ariana stared at it, marker in hand, the class watching every breath. There was a way to start the standard way. Break the system into parts, solve incrementally, follow procedure, show that she knew the basics. That would be safe, that would get her out of this unscathed. But there was also something else. A thread buried inside the equation, a structural inefficiency, a hidden repetition in the Jacobian that could be bypassed entirely if you rewrote the constraints. It would save 3 steps in 5 minutes. It would also go against the exact poof Dr. Crane expected. And she saw it instantly, like breathing. Most wouldn't risk it, but Ariana wasn't here to be safe. She had spent too long outside rooms like this to walk into one now and shrink. Her fingers closed around the marker. She chose her path. The first stroke hit the board with quiet precision. At first there was nothing, just the dry hiss of marker on whiteboard, the occasional rustle of someone shifting in their seat. But then a flicker, students leaned in. She wasn't solving the problem like they had expected. She had taken a different route, one that looked foreign and fast, yet terrifyingly logical. Her notation was clean, elegant. She made no unnecessary marks, no pauses. Line after line, the monster on the board began to shrink. Even the ones who hadn't been paying attention now watched with still eyes. In the back row, someone whispered, "Wait, is she skipping the eigenvector isolation?" Another voice, hesitant but impressed. "She's compressing the system dynamics." Dr. Crane's arms crossed. Ariana reached the midpoint of the problem. She stopped, checked her work, not out of doubt, but discipline. Her hand steadied, then she continued. A minute later, she stepped back, boxed her final answer. The room was silent. Crane approached the board, slowly, carefully. He examined each step with the kind of scrutiny that could make equations unravel, but nothing unraveled. Finally he spoke. "Unusual," he said dryly, "but correct." And then another voice, one soft, clear, and new. "Actually said, Dr. Valerie Chen." Rising from her seat in the back, "It's better than correct. It's refined." The silence cracked, and in the fracture Ariana didn't smile. She simply handed the marker back and walked to her seat. Dr. Crane didn't move. He stood at the board, eyes tracing Ariana's work, like he was reading something in a language he wasn't fluent in, familiar enough to understand, but foreign enough to unsettle. He wasn't just checking for correctness. He was searching for a flaw, a misstep, a justification for what had just happened. But there was none. Each line was precise, each simplification mathematically sound, every bypass step intentional, not careless. She hadn't just solved the problem, she had redefined its structure. That kind of insight couldn't be taught. It had to be earned somewhere between fatigue and obsession. He turned slowly to the room. "Unconventional," he said again this time. "Softer, but correct." The class, frozen in quiet surprise, shifted, not with applause, not with gasps, but with something subtler, a recalibration of judgment. Heads tilted, pens scribbled, eyes once indifferent. Now followed her as she walked back to her seat. And then, "That wasn't just correct," Dr. Chen said, rising fully this time. "That was a better solution than I've seen presented in my own graduate seminars." She wasn't smiling, but her tone carried a certain weight. One the students recognized. One Crane couldn't ignore. It was endorsement, not from a peer but from a challenger. Crane's jaw tightened just barely. He looked back at the board as though it might suddenly reveal the weakness he'd missed. But there was no weakness. There was only Ariana Wells. Dr. Crane didn't like losing the room. He was used to being the final voice in it, not because he demanded it, but because he had earned it. Years of published papers, Grant's guest lectures across the world. And yet, in a matter of minutes, a quiet transfer student had shifted that balance without saying more than a dozen words. He reached for his tablet again. Another problem appeared on the board, this one more brutal than the first. Dense with constraints, non-linear elements embedded in time series. The kind of equation that required strategy, not just endurance. The room stiffened. Miss Wells Crane said with deliberate calm, "Let's see if your method holds up here." It wasn't a request. It was a second swing, one that could flatten even the brightest student if they approached it without care. Ariana stood. She didn't look rattled. She didn't look victorious either. She simply walked back to the front. Marker in hand, she studied the new challenge. A heartbeat passed. 2. Then she began. There was no hesitation this time. Ariana worked with a rhythm that didn't rush but didn't pause either. Her hands moved smoothly as if the solution had been waiting in her head all along, and now it was simply being released onto the board. No dramatics, no apologies. Only math. Some students leaned forward. Others whispered to each other, not with skepticism this time, but curiosity. She's simplifying the exponential decay directly. Wait, how did she spot that pattern so fast? She reached the final constraint, resolved it, boxed her answer, and capped the marker. Then she turned. That's the solution. Dr. Chen stood up first. That, she said with quiet clarity, is nothing short of genius. The room responded not with noise, but stillness. The kind that comes when people realize they're watching something they don't fully understand yet, but know they'll remember. Crane said nothing. He looked at the board, unreadable. But the silence said enough. The class sat in suspension, caught in the moment between shift and response. Crane walked slowly to the board. His eyes scanned her solution, his face neutral, his breath shallow. He was a man recalibrating his authority in real time. She has a unique approach, he said finally. Dr. Chen cut in without looking at him. It's not unique, she said. It's advanced. She didn't guess her way there. She restructured the system in fewer steps with less computation. That's not clever, that's mastery. Crane said nothing. A student, one of the louder skeptics from earlier, raised a tentative hand. Professor, could she maybe explain how she saw that shortcut? I honestly wouldn't have thought to tackle it like that. Another followed. Yeah, I'm curious too. Crane hesitated. The room once his to command now belonged to someone else. Dr. Chen turned to Ariana. Would you mind walking us through your reasoning? Ariana blinked, not because she didn't want to, but because she'd never been asked before. She nodded, then picked up the marker again. She didn't perform, she explained. Measured, thoughtful, clear. She broke the equation down into parts, showing how she spotted redundant variables in the coefficients, how she shifted the axis to remove complexity before it even appeared. As she spoke, the class took notes not because they were told to, but because they wanted to. Even Crane watched his expression still but quietly distant, as if he knew the power had already left his hands. When she finished, she placed the marker down and returned to her seat. This time, the path back felt different. The glances weren't cold or questioning. They were contemplative, respectful, curious. Class ended. Students packed slowly as if they didn't want to leave just yet. A boy who had laughed at her earlier hesitated by her desk. That was impressive, he offered. She didn't look up, I know. He let out a surprised chuckle, not mocking, just honest. She slung her bag over her shoulder, and left. The world didn't erupt into applause. But the silence behind her was no longer dismissal. It was awe. Outside, the sky had shifted from gray to gold, the kind of late afternoon light that makes even old concrete glow. Ariana pulled out her phone. A text had come through. Eli, how was day one? She smiled, typed back. Ariana, same as usual, except I made Crane eat his own words. The typing dots popped up immediately. Eli, no way, what happened? She thought for a second, then replied, Ariana. He thought he could embarrass me. He embarrassed himself instead. She slipped the phone back into her coat. Her steps were lighter now, not because she'd won anything, but because something had shifted not just in that classroom, but in the quiet corners of the system itself. The kind of shift no one announces, but everyone feels. She hadn't just solved an equation, she had rewritten who gets to hold the marker. And she wasn't giving it back. If you've ever walked into a room where no one expected you to succeed, remember this. You don't need permission to be brilliant. You don't need validation to be worthy. Your mind is your own, and when it speaks, let it roar in silence. If this story inspired you, share it, comment your thoughts, and subscribe for more emotional stories that remind us what quiet strength can do. He paused. You wanted her to kneel, Now it was Evelyn who stepped forward. "They wanted me to say I didn't belong," she said, her voice measured audible, unwavering. "They were so busy protecting their fences that they forgot who built the park." The crowd murmured. Sponsors shifted nervously. Players looked at their cleats. And then Nathaniel continued, his eyes scanning the field. "From this moment forward, anyone who participated in today's discrimination will not be welcome at any league venue or event associated with Horizon Athletics. You have until the end of this inning to vacate the field." The words fell like lightning. Serena's sapphire wristband was the first to dim, remotely deactivated. Cameron's buzzed and went black. Then Lauren, then Richard, then Callum. The system was already in motion. The purge had begun. Near the media platform, a commentator pulled off her headset. "We are witnessing," she said quietly, "the single biggest takedown of elitism in modern sports." Meanwhile, Evelyn stood quietly, gripping her bat like a relic from another world. She didn't gloat, she didn't smile. Her silence wasn't empty, it was earned. The same crowd that had laughed now stared at her with a mix of awe and guilt. She was no longer just the mystery woman on the field. She was Evelyn Brooks Rowe, and she had just rewritten the rules. The weight of silence on the Kingsway diamond could have flattened the fences. Serena Vaughn stood frozen at second base, her hands clenched into fists so tight her manicured nails pressed half-moons into her palms. The sapphire wristband on her arm flickered, then buzzed and died, deactivated. Across the dugout, Cameron Ellis dropped her bat bag as her own wristband flashed red. The sponsors she had tagged a dozen times on Instagram. Gone the endorsements she flaunted, voided with a single tap from Nathaniel Rowe's tablet. A hush swept through the elite roster like a storm. Evelyn Brooks, the girl they had all dismissed, was now the center of gravity. Her name was whispered in a dozen mouths, her home run still bouncing through replay screens. And her husband, the man they all wanted access to, had spoken. Their reigns were over. One by one, they began to fall. Callum Yates, the tournament coordinator, attempted damage control. He approached Nathaniel at the edge of the field, clipboard trembling. "Sir, if we could just..." Nathaniel's glance silenced him. "You let gatekeeping define your tournament," he said. "You built walls around a game meant to be played." Callum's credentials were revoked before he reached the fence. He would not be coordinating another tournament again. From the dugout, Emily Tate, smug in her tailored blazer and infamous for curating who got to play and who didn't, looked down at her tablet. Her Kingsway access was revoked. Her profile is labeled inactive. Richard Tate, standing beside her with his arms crossed, went pale as his own phone buzzed. Notifications streamed across the screen. A cascade of sponsorship withdrawals, revoked contracts, and disciplinary flags from athletic committees. Even the tournament's internal chat pinged with mass resignations. The empire they had built on exclusion had fallen not with shouts, but with silence and code. Serena tried to speak. She walked toward Evelyn, face-flushed, voice uneven. "Look, I didn't know." Evelyn turned, finally meeting her gaze. Her eyes, steady, unreadable, did not blink. "You didn't care to know." Serena hesitated. "It was a joke." "You meant every word." Serena's voice broke. "I'm sorry, but the apology wasn't for Evelyn. It was for the cameras, for the sponsors she'd just lost, for the empire crumbling behind her." Evelyn didn't respond. She didn't need to. The absence of forgiveness was its own verdict. High in the VIP suite, executives watched in tense silence. Brands pulled their logos from Serena's team. Agencies removed Cameron's face from upcoming campaigns. The PR fallout was already trending on social media. Kingsway collapse, Brooks' home run, silent swing. Evelyn's swing wasn't just athletic, it was tectonic. She had cracked open the surface and beneath it exposed the rot. In the stands, murmurs turned to applause. First in scattered claps, then louder, then unified. Even the young girl from earlier, the one who had asked, "Who is she?" stood and cheered with both hands in the air. Her mother eyes misty joined her. Evelyn didn't smile. Not yet. She stood still, watching the collapse like someone who had been burned too many times to celebrate too quickly. She had seen glory. She had seen cruelty. She had seen what it took for a woman like her to exist in a space like this. Let them fall. She would stand. Behind the fence, a camera crew caught up to Lauren Hart, one of the semi-pros who had called Evelyn's bat a garage sale joke. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "I didn't know she was married to Nathaniel Rowe," she said into the lens. The reporter stared. Would it have mattered? Lauren's throat worked around an answer. I guess not." The broadcast cut away. Truth had become a blade, and Evelyn wielded it without ever raising her voice. Nathaniel returned to the pavilion, standing tall beside Evelyn as the crowd rose to its feet. The scoreboard didn't show innings anymore. It showed one name, E. Brooks, 1 HR. The stats were irrelevant. The swing was immortal. Even as the sun dipped slightly, casting long, golden lines across the infield, the shadows spreading through Kingsway Pavilion weren't from the sky. They were from whispers. And those whispers had teeth. With Serena Cameron and the rest exposed, a new wave of voices emerged. Not from players, but from the seats, the lounges and the media pits. They didn't scream, they murmured, but murmurs, when seated in the right places, move like poison. She manipulated the tournament. This whole thing was staged for PR. She's just another rich wife with a bat. Nathaniel orchestrated this. It's all a setup, so people couldn't process what they'd seen. That power could arrive quietly in scuffed sneakers and a second-hand bat. So they did what cowards always do. They rewrote the story to fit their comfort. Evelyn heard the shift before anyone spoke it aloud. She'd seen it before at her first local league tryout, when she outplayed everyone and suddenly became the target of recalibrated rules. She'd seen it again when her coaching job mysteriously ended after a sponsor's daughter didn't make the cut. Now, even after her swing had silenced the elite, their need to protect the hierarchy made them dangerous again. Because nothing threatens entitlement more than merit. In the media lounge, a former athlete turned commentator leaned into her mic. Let's be honest, folks, she's not credentialed, she's not ranked. No. Olympic history, one swing doesn't make a legend. It Boris pours and Oldigis. Another pundit added, and this isn't about her. This is about Nathaniel flexing power over an entire league. She's just the face of his agenda. Back in the pavilion, Nathaniel watched it unfold like a man who had already read the script. His assistant approached with a phone showing a trending thread. If Evelyn Brooks really cared about fairness, she wouldn't have needed her husband to make it happen. He set the phone down. The same people who demanded she earn her place now blame her for having one, he murmured. Evelyn nodded slowly, not angry, just aware. They don't want fairness, they want ownership. Meanwhile, on the field, the crowd had turned from a wave of applause to a crashing tide of analysis. Some cheered genuinely. Others watched with narrowed eyes, calculating what this meant for their investments, their reputations, and their control. Because Evelyn hadn't just hit a home run, she had proved that skill and silence could dismantle prestige. And then came the reporters. A flood of microphones and camera lights encircled her like a slow-moving storm. Mrs. Brooks, did you know the backlash your swing would cause? Is this a planned media stunt to reposition Horizon Athletics? Do you feel you've hijacked the tournament's integrity? Evelyn looked into the camera. Her voice was calm, unshaken. You asked me to prove I belonged here, so I swung. Everything else is noise. Still, the field trembled under the weight of public opinion. In the background, a handful of tournament sponsors were debating their position. One whispered, "It's easier to rebuild Serena's image than defend Evelyn's." Another responded dryly, "That's what they said about truth, and look where we are." But Evelyn wasn't there to argue. She had fought to exist in spaces like this her whole life. Every room she entered knowing someone would try to push her out. This was just another version of it, more polished, more televised. The truth, they didn't hate that she succeeded. They hated that she did it without needing their permission. And even still, the biggest tremor hadn't hit yet. It was walking down the tunnel. It wore gold-rimmed glasses and a media lanyard, and it was about to set fire to the very foundation they thought would protect them. Through the narrow passage leading from the media corridor, a pair of quiet steps echoed with more weight than the $1,000 cleats that had strutted across the Kingsway Diamond all afternoon. Rhea Mallory, 38. An investigative sports journalist for the Standard Post, didn't look like someone about to set fire to reputations. She wore no press blazer or logo pin, just a black satchel across her shoulder, glasses perched on the bridge of her nose, and a silver recorder clutched in one hand. She didn't need to shout for attention. She carried truth, and that was louder than anything. The pavilion had turned into a hive of murmurs and political math. Executives whispered in circles. PR managers typed damage control, drafts, coordinators paced. But they all stopped when they saw Rhea Mallory. Because Rhea didn't cover gossip, she exposed rot. She'd brought down 3 corrupt athletic boards in 5 years. She was the one who unearthed the performance-enhancing scandal at Dynaleague. And now she was at Kingsway with receipts. And one question: why did the league hide Evelyn Brooks's record? She didn't ask it in private. She asked it on the microphone, live to the entire pavilion. The press pit hushed. Executives froze, mid-sip. Cameras turned. Athletes blinked. Rhea's voice rang clear. 4 years ago, in the independent circuit, Evelyn Brooks hit a record-setting 39 home runs in a single season. She coached 3 junior teams to the state finals. She qualified for open trials in 2 leagues and was rejected without explanation each time. She pulled out a packet of files and handed them to the media director. These rejections, she continued, all signed off by the same panel that invited Serena Vaughn, Lauren Holt, and Cameron Ellis, none of whom met the full qualifying benchmarks that year. The pavilion erupted. Evelyn stood still at the edge of the field, her fingers resting on the grip of her second-hand bat. She hadn't known Rhea was coming. She didn't ask for any of this. But she didn't stop it either. She had nothing left to hide. And for the first time, nothing left to prove. Rhea kept going. And let's talk about funding. The Kingsway Revitalization Grant. That wasn't a corporate initiative. It was Evelyn Brooks's personal donation through a blind trust meant to help underfunded players get access to this field. The air tightened. So, when players mocked her shoes, her bat, her swing, they were doing it on land she paid for. In uniforms, her silent investment helped provide. A sound rippled through the pavilion. Not a cheer, not yet. A reckoning, a shameful silence. Rhea wasn't done. And lastly, she said, flipping a final page, when she registered for this tournament, her name was flagged, not for security, not for performance. She paused. She was flagged as a potential disruption to image consistency. That term, those 5 words, it was what corporations used when someone didn't look the part. Too poor, too plain, too honest. A slow clap began at the far end of the bleachers. Then another's, and another, until the pavilion that had once hissed with judgment now trembled with reluctant rising applause. People weren't just watching Evelyn anymore. They were watching the story collapse and a new one rise. And as Evelyn turned toward Rhea, their eyes met. Rhea nodded once. You gave them a swing. Her gaze seemed to say, I gave them the truth. The applause hadn't even faded before the reckoning began. Serena Vaughn sat on the edge of the dugout, staring at her phone as messages poured in, not from fans, but from brands withdrawing support teammates, cutting ties, and lawyers requesting silence. Her $6,000 cleats suddenly felt like weights strapped to her ankles. The platform she had built on exclusivity and disdain was crumbling, not just because of Evelyn Brooks, but because the world had finally seen what was behind the glitter. Nothing. Nothing but fear dressed in wealth. Nothing but arrogance is mistaken for merit. Next to her, Cameron Ellis tried to reapply lip gloss with trembling hands. Her social media manager had texted 3 times in all caps, delete the posts, all of them, but the damage was done. Clips of her sneering at Evelyn were already stitched into hundreds of viral videos overlaid with captions like, "This aged like Milk Elite until someone swings back. Guess who owns the field?" Her follower count plummeted with every refresh. The world wasn't just watching anymore. They were choosing sides, and they weren't choosing her. Back on the field, tournament officials, once smug in their tailored blazers and headset microphones, now huddled in whispers. The board had been notified. The Horizon Athletic League was assembling an emergency ethics committee. Nathaniel Rowe's voice, measured and calm, echoed in their minds. Anyone who participated in today's discrimination will no longer have a seat at the table. And now, there were no chairs left. A Kingsway representative stepped forward holding a silver mic with trembling hands. We would like to issue an apology, but the crowd didn't want a statement. They wanted truth. So the mic was passed, first to Lauren Holt, the semi-pro who had mocked Evelyn's bat. She stepped forward, her Prada uniform now wilted by sweat and shame. Her voice cracked. I said things I thought would keep me in favor. I thought mocking her made me safe. She turned to Evelyn, unable to meet her eyes. I was wrong. You showed all of us what real strength looks like. Next was Serena Vaughn. She walked to the mic like someone walking to the gallows. The crowd didn't boo. They didn't need to. She felt every step like judgment. Her voice, once razor-sharp, now trembled. I let my fear of being outshined turn into cruelty. She paused. The silence waited. I'm sorry, Evelyn. I don't expect forgiveness. But I needed to say it. Cameron stepped up next. She didn't speak right away. She opened her mouth, then closed it. She wiped away mascara streaks with her thumb. Her breath hitched. "You didn't deserve what we did," she finally whispered. And the worst part is, we all knew it. We just didn't care. That honesty, raw and painful, settled on the crowd heavier than any scripted PR note could have. Evelyn didn't speak. Not yet. She stood beside Nathaniel, her bat resting lightly against the fence. Her eyes locked not on her enemies, but on the young girls in the crowd. Those watching, those learning, those deciding whether this world had space for them too. And then from the pavilion's side gate, the Horizon board chair stepped onto the field with a folder in hand. He didn't make a speech. He handed the folder to the lead commentator, who read it live. Effective immediately, the Horizon League hereby terminates all partnerships, contracts, and appearances associated with the following individuals. The names were read one by one, and each one was a once untouchable. Serena Vaughn Cameron, Ellis Lauren Holt, Callum Yates, Emily Tate, Richard Tate. And then, in recognition of her impact, integrity, and contribution to the sport, the league officially names Evelyn Brooks as this season's Sports Integrity Ambassador. The stadium erupted. Not with rage, not with scandal, e'en with hope. The scoreboard changed. Where numbers once blinked, there now glowed. Truth status. Brooks, one swing, one legacy. When the noise faded, when the microphones were lowered and the apologies spoke, Evelyn Brooks was still standing. She hadn't needed a podium. She didn't issue a press release. There were no dramatic speeches. Just her bat, her breath, and the weight of silence that followed her every step, like a crown she never asked for, but one she'd more than earned. In the aftermath of the public fallout, the stadium at Kingsway Pavilion took on a strange hush. A humbled quiet, not of shame anymore, but of recognition. Players once distracted by clout and competition now watched Evelyn not like an outsider, but like the standard they had ignored for too long. A new player, just 19, fresh-faced and trembling, approached her with hesitant steps. "Miss Brooks," she said, voice cracking. "Can I shake your hand?" Evelyn turned surprised. Anne nodded. The girl took it like she was touching a myth. Up in the commentary booth, the team sat uncharacteristically still. One of them, Carmen Lee, known for her sharp critiques, finally spoke into the mic, her voice lower than usual. "I've covered over 100 tournaments," she said, "and I've never seen a swing tear down an empire faster than a scandal." She didn't yell, she didn't gloat. She just showed up and told the truth with a bat. The silence that followed wasn't edited for effect. It was real. At the edge of the dugout, Nathaniel Rowe adjusted his cufflinks, watching Evelyn speak softly to the younger players now gathering around her. A new formation. Not of brands, but of respect. Not of reputation, but of reverence. He said nothing, he only smiled, and beneath that smile was the knowledge of something he'd always known. You don't have to speak loudly when your integrity echoes. Later that afternoon, the official photographer approached Evelyn for her feature photo. She declined the makeup touch-up. She kept her hair in its loose bun. She wore the same sun-faded green t-shirt and canvas sneakers that had carried her through the chaos. She didn't pose. She stood with the bat slung lightly over her shoulder and looked into the lens the way she had looked at the first pitch. Calm, grounded, unshakable. The photo was published under the headline, "The Swing That Didn't Need a Jersey," and below it, the subscription read, "Evelyn Brooks, the woman who reclaimed a game with silent skill and grace, or superpapaspo." Back in the pavilion, where once her name was muttered with contempt, executives now scrambled to salvage ties. A high-ranking brand rep sent a message. "We would like to extend a full sponsorship package to Miss Brooks." The response, "Thank you," she declines. She didn't need their symbols. She had become her own. By evening, the field no longer felt like it belonged to the elite. It belonged to Evelyn Brooks, not officially, not by deed or title, but by spirit, by presence, by truth. The diamond she'd stepped onto as an intruder that morning was now etched with her name, even if no one spray-painted it on the grass. The young girls in the bleachers weren't watching Serena anymore. They weren't filming Cameron's branded gear or Lauren Holt's polished windups. They were watching Evelyn rewrap the tape on her bat grip with calm hands the same way she'd done 1,000 times under the Montana sun, with dust on her knuckles and no audience to applaud. A swing had rewritten Kingsway, but a life had built that swing. Later that night, in a quiet moment, Evelyn sat alone in the home dugout, not with her bat, but with a cup of lemon water and her thoughts. She thought about the churchyard field where she first practiced hitting soda cans off fence posts, The diner where she served hash browns at 6 a.m. to afford her league fees. The kids she coached who couldn't afford gloves, so she bought them. The charity game where she first met Nathaniel and ignored him because she had no clue who he was. She thought about silence, and how it had been her weapon all along. A knock on the dugout frame broke her thoughts. It was Arthur Knox, the 66-year-old umpire whose voice had called the home run. He held his cap in one hand, a small velvet box in the other. "Evelyn," he said quietly. The board voted, "This hasn't been done in 2 decades." He opened the box. Inside was a small silver medallion, etched with a bat and a crown. "You just joined the Hall of Firsts." She blinked. "What is that?" "It's for the few who change the game without needing to win it. People remember the winners, but the firsts, they change everything." She stared at it for a long time, then nodded and accepted it, not because she wanted recognition, but because she finally felt like the diamond remembered her. Outside the stadium, lights dimmed. Volunteers swept confetti and emptied seats. But even when the screens went black, Evelyn's presence stayed in every chalk line, in every dent on the outfield wall where her swing had cracked the sky. Kingsway Pavilion had been reclaimed, not by power, not by money, by truth, and it had her name written between the bases now. The sun had dipped fully behind the horizon, now casting the Kingsway Pavilion in a soft indigo glow. The field, once pulsing with tension, now rested in a kind of sacred stillness. In the visitors' corridor, the hallway that led from the dugout to the back gates, Evelyn Brooks walked quietly beside Nathaniel Rowe. There were no drones overhead, no reporters chasing sound bites, just the soft rhythm of 2 pairs of footsteps, one in leather, one in worn canvas. Nathaniel turned to her as they neared the exit. "You know, this won't be the last time they try to write you out." Evelyn gave a small smile. "Let them write, I'll keep swinging." He looked at her the same way he had the day at the charity field, when she'd ignored his business card and asked him if he wanted to help pick up garbage after the game. He had never forgotten that, because she never asked for a spotlight. She just made sure the lights turned toward others who deserved it. Back at the diamond, a janitor pushed a broom across third base. He stopped for a moment and looked up. Evelyn was standing by the fence looking back at the field one last time. She raised a hand to her eyes, not to wipe away a tear, but to see clearly under the glow of the pavilion lights. The same lights that had once made her squint in humiliation now glinted off her quiet victory. And she didn't wave. She didn't bow. She just nodded once to the field, to the air, to the ghosts of every other girl who had ever been told she didn't belong here. The plaque outside the stadium was being updated the next morning. The tournament had a new title sponsor, but more importantly, a new legend. Etched in brass under the heading Legacy Moments were the words, Evelyn Brooks. She didn't ask for permission. She just swung. In homes across the country, the story played on television and social media. A woman with no logos, no rank, and no invitation. A swing that silenced arrogance. A truth revealed not with force, but with precision. Girls watched, coaches watched, executives watched, but perhaps most importantly, gatekeepers watched. And suddenly, a bat from a thrift store looked more powerful than any gold-plated trophy. At home in Montana, a dusty field sat under a sky full of stars. It had no scoreboard, no pavilion, no sponsors, but it had her footsteps worn into the soil from 1,000 mornings. The same place she'd once whispered to herself, "Maybe one day they'll let me in." Now, the world knew the truth. She was never asking. She was never waiting. She was building a swing strong enough to break through the doors. As she and Nathaniel reached their car, he opened the door and looked at her, ready to go home. Evelyn glanced once more at the fading lights of Kingsway Pavilion. Anne nodded. "Let's go." She stepped in quietly without ceremony, just like the way she entered the field. But the difference now, the world had changed in her wake. One swing, one moment, no permission.